I had spent the last month drowning in a sea of exhaustion and disappointment. At 38, I thought I had built a life that would stand strong against the storms of change, but I had been wrong. My divorce, finalized just a few weeks ago, left an emptiness in my home, an echo of what used to be love, now replaced by silence. Work wasn't any better. Each day felt like another battle I was losing, and my body, as if conspiring against me, seemed to be giving up in ways I didn't quite understand. It felt like the whole world was against me. My house, sitting quietly at the edge of the city, had always been a refuge, but now it felt more like a cage. The loneliness, the stillness, it was suffocating. Then my sister called. "Hey, you sound terrible," she said bluntly, never one to sugarcoat things. "Thanks," I sighed, running a hand through my tangled hair. "Exactly the pep talk I needed." She chuckled. "Look, I was thinking, Josh has some time off, and he could use a change of scenery. Why don't I send him over to you for a few days?" Josh. My nephew. The thought of company made me hesitate. I had always adored Josh. When he was younger, we had shared an easy bond, filled with laughter, silly pranks, and a kind of mutual understanding that made family feel less like an obligation and more like a joy. But it had been years since we'd truly spent time together. Still, the idea of someone else breaking the unbearable quiet of my home was tempting. "Yeah," I found myself saying. "That would be nice." 2 days later, the sound of a car pulling into my driveway pulled me from my haze. I peered out the window, and when I saw him step out, my breath caught. Josh wasn't a boy anymore. He had grown. A lot. Gone was the lanky kid who used to run through my house, knocking over vases and leaving fingerprints on every surface. The young man standing before me was tall, confident in a way that made me blink twice. He carried himself with a quiet ease, his dark hair tousled just enough to look effortless. Then he grinned. That same boyish, mischievous grin that I remembered. "Auntie." He strode up the porch steps and wrapped me in a tight hug, lifting me off my feet for a moment before setting me down. I laughed, though the sound surprised me. I hadn't laughed like that in weeks. "You're huge," I said, stepping back to get a proper look at him. "And you're still tiny," he teased. "Or maybe I'm just jacked now." Rolling my eyes, I led him inside, already feeling the weight on my chest lighten. The house felt different with Josh around. He filled the space with energy, moving through the rooms as if he had always belonged there. He teased me for my sad excuse of a fridge. "Auntie, do you even eat real food?" Convinced me to binge-watch a ridiculous series on Netflix, and somehow, without even trying, made the walls of my home feel less suffocating. One evening after dinner, we found ourselves sitting on the back porch. The air was cool, and the sky stretched above us, vast and endless. "You doing okay?" he asked after a while, his voice softer than usual. I hesitated. "I don't know." Josh leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. "Mom said you've been having a rough time." I sighed, swirling the wine in my glass. "I guess I have." He was quiet for a moment, then nudged my leg with his foot. "You know, you don't have to be strong all the time." I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. "It's hard." "I know," he said. "But you've got people who care about you." I turned to him, really looking at him. There was a warmth in his gaze, a steadiness that made my throat tighten. When had he grown up into this person? "You're a good kid, Josh," I murmured. He smirked. "Not a kid anymore." Something about the way he said it made my stomach flip. I looked away, suddenly very aware of the space between us. The days passed too quickly. Josh had a way of making everything feel lighter, whether it was forcing me out of the house for ice cream or making me laugh over something completely ridiculous. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to happy. But with that lightness came something else, a tension I couldn't quite name. It was in the way I caught him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. In the way he leaned a little too close when we sat on the couch. in the way his hand would linger just a moment too long when he passed me something. I told myself I was imagining it, until I wasn't. One night, after another Netflix marathon, I stood to stretch. "All right, bedtime for me?" Josh, sprawled out on the couch, looked up at me. "Already? It's late," I said, rubbing my neck. He watched me for a beat, then sat up. "Auntie," he said, his tone different this time. I turned to him, suddenly feeling unsteady. "Yeah?" He hesitated, then stood, stepping toward me. He stopped, ran a hand through his hair, then sighed. "Never mind." I frowned. "Josh." He looked at me then, something unreadable in his eyes. I don't like seeing you like this." I swallowed. "Like what?" "Like you're carrying the weight of the world alone." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Then he reached out, his fingers brushing against mine. A simple touch, but it sent something electric through me. I should have pulled away. I should have said something, done something to stop whatever this was. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, caught in the moment, in the warmth of his hand, in the quiet between us that felt heavier than words. Josh exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not alone." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. I was exhausted. After another long, empty day, I had been ready to crawl into bed and escape into restless sleep. But Josh had other plans. "Nope, you're not going to sleep," he said, standing in my bedroom doorway with that infuriatingly confident smirk of his. "Get dressed." I blinked at him, confused. "Josh, it's late." He stepped forward, grabbed my hand, and gently pulled me up. "Exactly. That's why we're going out." "No excuses." "Where are we going?" I asked, even as he practically dragged me toward the closet. "It's a surprise," he said, his grin widening. I sighed, but something about the mischief in his eyes made it impossible to refuse. With a dramatic groan, I rummaged through my wardrobe and threw on a sweater and jeans. "Happy?" "Very," he said, tugging me along. He drove us into the night, refusing to tell me where we were headed. The windows were down, and the cool night air filled the car as he cranked up the music. It wasn't long before I found myself laughing, really laughing, in a way I hadn't in what felt like forever. He glanced over at me, grinning. "That's a good sound," he said. I rolled my eyes but couldn't fight the warmth in my chest. "Shut up and drive." He chuckled and reached over, briefly squeezing my hand before returning it to the wheel. The touch lingered in my mind longer than it should have. We pulled up to a brightly lit entrance, and it took me a moment to register where we were. An amusement park. Josh turned off the car and shot me a smug look. "You like it?" I stared at the colorful lights, the sound of laughter and music floating through the air. I haven't been to one in years." "Exactly." He stepped out and walked around to open my door, extending his hand. "So let's fix that." I hesitated only a second before taking it. Josh was relentless. He pulled me onto roller coasters, forced me into bumper cars, and even made me play one of those impossible ring toss games. He was so determined to win me a giant stuffed animal that I nearly died laughing watching him fail over and over. He wasn't used to losing. "All right," he said, rolling his shoulders like a fighter preparing for battle. "One more time." I smirked. "Josh, face it. You suck at this." His eyes narrowed. "That's hurtful, Auntie." I snorted. "It's the truth." His gaze flicked to me, something unreadable in his expression. "You always look so cute when you tease me." The casual way he said it caught me completely off guard. Heat rushed to my cheeks, and I quickly looked away. "Shut up and throw the ring." He grinned but mercifully let it go. Eventually, we made our way to the Ferris wheel. "Oh no," I said, taking a step back. "I don't know about this." Josh raised an eyebrow. "You're afraid of heights?" "No," I said too quickly. "I just don't love them." He laughed, grabbing my hand and pulling me toward the line. "Come on. It'll be fun." With him still holding on to me, I let out a breath and nodded. By the time we reached the top, the view was breathtaking. The city stretched out in glittering lights beneath us, the night air crisp and cool. Josh wrapped an arm around me, pulling me closer. "See," he murmured. "Told you it'd be worth it." I swallowed, suddenly aware of how close we were. "Yeah," I admitted, barely above a whisper. Then, without warning, the wheel jerked to a stop. I gasped, my grip tightening on the bar in front of us. "Relax," Josh said, squeezing my shoulder. "Probably just routine maintenance or something." A voice crackled through a loudspeaker below. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the inconvenience. We're experiencing a minor delay. Please remain seated. We should be moving again in about 20 minutes. I exhaled, forcing myself to calm down. Josh smirked. "You good?" "I'm fine," I muttered, though my hand still felt unsteady. His arm tightened around me. "You're cold." I hadn't even noticed the chill setting in, but now that he mentioned it, I shivered slightly. Without a word, he shifted so that I was practically curled against him. His warmth was immediate, his body solid and reassuring. "There," he murmured. "Better." I nodded, my heart hammering for an entirely different reason now. The silence stretched between us, thick with something unspoken. I could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest, the warmth of his breath against my temple. Then he moved. Slowly, carefully, he tilted my chin up so I was looking at him. I should have pulled away. I didn't. His gaze flickered down to my lips, just for a second. Then he kissed me. It was soft at first, hesitant, as if waiting to see if I would pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. A shiver ran through me, but it had nothing to do with the cold. My hands found their way to his jacket, gripping it as he deepened the kiss just enough to send my pulse into chaos. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. I started, but no words came. Josh chuckled softly, his breath warm against my skin. "Didn't see that coming, huh?" I swallowed, my head spinning. "Josh, I know," he said gently, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "But tell me you didn't feel that too." I opened my mouth, ready to say something, anything to make sense of what had just happened. But then, the wheel lurched back to life, breaking the moment. Josh exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Guess we have to go back to reality now." I nodded, still unable to speak. The ride slowly descended, the city lights growing closer, and yet I felt like I had left the ground entirely. When we reached the bottom, Josh helped me out, his touch lingering just a second too long. Neither of us said anything as we walked back toward the car. But I knew something had changed, and there was no going back. I barely had time to process what had just happened between us before Josh grabbed my hand again, leading me away from the Ferris wheel as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. My lips still tingled from his kiss, and my mind was a tangled mess of thoughts I couldn't quite unravel. I should have stopped him, should have demanded we talk about what had just happened. But I didn't, because despite the confusion, despite the logical part of my brain screaming that this was something I should not be feeling, there was another part of me, one that had been dormant for so long, that felt alive again. And that part of me didn't want the night to end. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to sound casual as he led me back to the car. Josh shot me a grin, his fingers still wrapped around mine. "You'll see." We drove through the city, past quiet streets and neon-lit corners, the Ferris wheel now just a distant blur in my mind. Josh turned on the music again, something upbeat and familiar, and drummed his fingers against the steering wheel. "You okay?" he asked after a few minutes, glancing at me. I exhaled, finally forcing a smile. "Yeah, just thinking." His lips twitched in amusement, thinking about how amazing that view was. I swallowed. "Or about the way you kissed me." But I just nodded. "Yeah, the view." Josh smirked like he knew I was lying, but he didn't push. Instead, he reached over and turned the volume up. Well, no more thinking. Just fun. That's the rule for tonight. I raised an eyebrow. Oh. And who made that rule? I did. I laughed despite myself, shaking my head. Figures. The city lights grew brighter as we pulled into the center of town. The streets, though quieter at this late hour, still held the occasional passerby, groups of friends stumbling out of bars, couples walking hand in hand. Josh parked the car in front of a small burger joint, one of those classic, old-school places with neon signs and checkered floors. The glowing open 24/7 sign flickered above the entrance, casting a warm, nostalgic light onto the sidewalk. I let out a surprised laugh. Seriously? A burger joint? He grinned. Only the best in the city. And the only place where we can eat like absolute animals without judgment. I highly doubt that, I teased, eyeing the few customers inside. Josh just smirked and opened my door for me. Come on, Auntie. Don't pretend you don't love a good midnight feast. Something about the way he said Auntie made my stomach flip. It was the same way he had always said it, playful, teasing, but now it felt different. Like an inside joke only the two of us shared. I tried not to dwell on that thought as I followed him inside. The moment we stepped in, the smell of sizzling beef and freshly baked buns filled the air. The place was exactly what I had expected. Red booths, faded movie posters on the walls, an old jukebox in the corner playing a tune from decades ago. Josh walked up to the counter like he owned the place. 2 double cheeseburgers, large fries, onion rings, and he turned to me. What do you want to drink? I laughed at the sheer amount of food he was ordering. Just a milkshake. He nodded. 1 vanilla milkshake, 1 chocolate. Oh, and extra ketchup. I raised an eyebrow. Are we feeding an army? Josh just grinned. Nope. Just us. We grabbed a booth near the window, and the moment the food arrived, he wasted no time digging in. I tried to eat gracefully, but Josh was the definition of chaos. He dunked his fries into his milkshake, took the biggest bites possible, and somehow managed to get ketchup on his cheek within minutes. You eat like a caveman, I teased, shaking my head. He swallowed a mouthful of burger and smirked. You love it. I rolled my eyes but couldn't stop smiling. It had been so long since I had felt this light, this happy. And Josh was why. At some point, I reached for a fry, only for him to grab my wrist mid-motion. He said, grinning mischievously. You gotta fight for it. I narrowed my eyes. Josh, give me the fry. He popped it into his mouth instead, chewing dramatically. Too slow, I gasped. You're impossible, he chuckled, then suddenly leaned forward, his eyes glinting with mischief. Oh, you got something on your face. I frowned. Where? Right here. Before I could react, he reached across the table, ran his thumb along my cheek, and, without hesitation, popped it into his mouth, licking off the ketchup. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It was playful, meant to be a joke, but something about the way he did it wasn't just playful. Josh held my gaze, his expression unreadable for a second too long. Then, with a smirk, he leaned back. Delicious. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, my heart hammering. You're ridiculous. He winked. And yet, you love hanging out with me. I grabbed a napkin and threw it at his face. He just laughed, his shoulders shaking as he caught it. We stayed in that little diner for over an hour, talking about everything and nothing at all. He asked me about my dreams, about what I wanted now that my life had shifted so drastically. I asked him about his plans, about where he saw himself in the next 5 years. But somewhere between the laughter and the teasing, something changed. He became softer, more attentive. He listened in a way I hadn't experienced in so long. He looked at me like I was someone who mattered, and I felt myself falling. It was terrifying, because I knew I shouldn't. But God, it felt so good. As we finally got up to leave, Josh stretched his arms over his head, looking completely content. All right. What's next? I laughed. Next? Josh, it's almost 2 in the morning. So, the night's still young. I shook my head. I think I've had enough excitement for one night. He pretended to pout. Boring. I rolled my eyes but smiled. Take me home, troublemaker. As we stepped outside, the night air was crisp and cool. Josh walked beside me, his hands tucked into his pockets. Then, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, he reached over and took my hand. I didn't stop him. I didn't want to, because in that moment, nothing had ever felt more right.